Now, today I'm very excited. We're going to hear about the untold history of Muslims in the Americas. So we're going to learn about different Muslim communities from as far north as the Northwest Territories and all the way down to Brazil, also Mexico, and all over the US. And these communities who have shaped this very vast continent of ours. So this event is also part of our celebration of Islamic History Month. And we're very grateful to have two presenting partners for this event. One is the city of Vancouver, and the other one is the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies at Simon Fraser University. So before I introduce today's speakers, I want to invite Dr. 𝗍𝗹𝗲 𝗍𝗶𝗲𝗃, who's a professor of global communication at SFU and the director of the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies, and he's going to say a few words. So 𝗍𝗹, please join us.
Hello, hi Jorge, how are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Excellent, fantastic. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to be part of today's program. As always, the Vancouver Public Library has been bringing forth some of the most compelling speakers and thinkers and writers on some of the most seminal and urgent issues of our day. And it's been a true delight to work with you, Jorge, in bringing today's program together. The Center for Comparative Muslim Studies has been around for quite some time at SFU, and our mandate has been to promote and support research, analysis, and outreach into Muslim communities and Muslim societies and cultures with all of their diversity, with all of their complexity. This year, more specifically, we've been thinking about the relationship between Muslim communities and indigenous communities and how to think about decolonization together. There's nothing more appropriate in addressing this than really trying to understand the relationship between Muslims and diaspora and the West. And Omar Mouallem's book is situated right at those crosswords. So it is my distinct pleasure to be involved with and to support today's program in honor of Islamic History Month, and to help us think through what it means to be Muslim on these unceded territories and how to move forward as communities, as collectives, and as individuals. So thank you so much, Jorge. Thank you to Vancouver Public Library. And thank you for the city of Vancouver and everybody who made this possible. Super excited to hear from both Omar and my dear friend, Dr. Minelle Mahtani, who will be moderating this. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, 𝗍𝗹. So now I'm excited to introduce Omar and Minelle. Can you please join me on stage? Great. Omar Mouallem is an award-winning writer and filmmaker. His journalism has appeared in The Guardian, The New Yorker, Rolling Stone, Maclean's, Wired, and many more. He co-authored a national bestseller called Inside the Inferno, which was about the firefighters who saved Fort McMurray during the big fire of 2016. And he also co-directed a film called Digging in the Dirt, which was about mental health in the Alberta oil patch. Also, in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, he founded a thing called the Pandemic University School of Writing, which if you haven't heard about it, please Google it. It's incredible. Now, Dr. Minelle Mahtani is associate professor at the Institute for Social Justice at UBC. She is a former national television news journalist at the CBC, and she also hosted the award-winning radio show Sense of Place at the Roundhouse Radio in Vancouver until 2018. She's also the author of a book called Mixed Race Amnesia. Very excited to have you both here. Now, they're going to be discussing this wonderful book by Omar. It's called Praying to the West. It's an incredible journey to 13 mosques across the continent. I love that we have the cover on all of the page, all the screens. It's a beautiful cover, really. So let's share it with everyone.
In case you forget what it looks like, it's just right behind me as well.
I really encourage everyone to go out there and buy it. Buy a couple of copies, share it with your friends. It's really a groundbreaking book. And we, of course, also have copies at the library. So put in your holds if you love borrowing books as well. We have a few copies and they all are spoken for so far. So anyway, that's enough from me. Omar, Minelle, great to have you here. Please take it away.
Thank you, Jorge. And thank you, 𝗍𝗹 and VPL and all the sponsoring partners.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Jorge. I hope you can hear me and see me. I just wondering that whether or not our Zoom is working okay. All good? Great. Omar, you know, I have waited so long to meet you for so many reasons, and I feel so lucky that I had the chance to be in conversation with you now. So, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you
if you're still there,
for hosting me in this conversation.
Well, yeah, there's so much that I want to talk to you about, but I want to begin with this, and I hope you won't mind me getting a little personal for a minute. But I think in some ways, this is the book I didn't even think I could ever hope for as a Muslim woman. You offer us a way to think about and educate people on Islamic history, on the land that we're on, Turtle Island, US, you know, all of the Americas. And I think what I loved so much about the book is that you're speaking about the presence of Muslims as something that is not new, right? That it goes back a long, long way in American history. Can we talk about that? Could it be potentially that American history is actually Islamic history and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, Islam was in the minds of some of the first people to come to this land, whether they were colonizing it or whether they were working the land as enslaved Muslims and you know, soon after indentured Indian laborers. And so, you know, whether they came from Africa or South Asia, or whether they came from, say, Spain in the 1500s, Islam was a pretty important influence on their worldview. And so if, you know, Islam was in their hearts or minds, if it was a part of, you know, part of their story, then those people who came to America or to the Americas and started to shape it into what it is today brought that Islamic history here with them. And therefore, yeah, I think Islamic history is American history and vice versa.
Right, right. No, and I really felt that reading it. And it was one of the things that really struck me in going through the actual book. I mean, one of the things you do, I'm a geographer by training, is that you actually take us on this incredible journey in this book. And the structure of the book is so compelling. I'm really, really moved by the structure of it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that kind of innovative scaffolding. You've divided it into 4 parts. And I'm really so excited to share with listeners a little bit about these 4 parts. You have a section on struggle, migration, moderation, and innovation. And each section is animated by these beautiful illustrations in Arabic. Tell us how you came to these divisions as you take us on this journey, you know, starting in Jerusalem and then back to Turtle Island.
Yeah, you're the first person to ever ask me that, including not even my editor. I'll be completely honest with you. So it's a pleasure to try to answer it. I think my thinking there, other than the fact that, you know, I wanted sections to make this book just a little bit more palatable and easier to consume in these little chunks, but also I just started to see, I think, like a pattern in the eras. So, you know, the first section kind of takes us to the early 1900s, and it's largely focused around Black Muslims and to a degree South Asian Muslims in the Caribbean. And really what it's about is their struggle to practice freely or to be accepted as legitimate Muslims, often by other Muslims, and their struggle to be seen. And it starts in Brazil with sort of a recreation, in a way, kind of a re-dramatization of the Malay Revolt in 1835, which was basically, it was a Muslim revolt. Another way of saying it is it was a jihad. Now, people don't like to hear that, but when you frame it as, when you frame it as a Muslim-led rebellion of slaves who were drawing from Islamic law, from Islamic laws of warfare in order to defend themselves and rise up against their masters, there really is no better word for it than a jihad. And I hope that, framing it that way will help people start to reconsider what is jihad really, and reconsider sort of the very, colonized term that, very, very colonized and I think one-dimensional definition of the term that they are familiar with often here in the West. And then, you know, the other sections, look, I can speak about it on and on, but sometimes I wanted to use the terms, use terms that have become quite politicized in Islamic communities. So, for example, bid'ah, which is this word for innovation, which is, it has become basically equal to heresy. You don't innovate Islam. Islam is complete. The Quran is perfect. You know, don't even think about adding your flavors to it. But it is kind of that viewpoint is just completely steeped in denialism, because all religions, including Islam, are fluid and they are always taking on different forms and shapes. And so I wanted to use that term in the last section to show how modern Muslim communities are adapting in the Americas to make it more palatable to them, to make it more, you know, more relevant for modern society. And none of it is to say that this is the way it should be done, that any of these communities are better or worse than the others, but it's rather just meant to sort of give people, I guess, access to what is actually going on in mosques, the debates and the conversations that are happening today, and how they were informed by the past.
Right. Thank you so much for telling us about the decisions that you made around the scaffolding, because I was really curious, and that's really helped me understand like the journey that you take us on. So thanks for that. I'm so dying to talk to you about the end of the book, but I want to make sure we go to the beginning. You know, September 11th happened 2 days before your 16th birthday. Mm-hmm. And you were just coming into age, into adulthood, like during the early years on the War on Terror. Did you feel this need to kind of perform this kind of antipathy towards religion, towards Islam? Yeah. And you actually say that there were 3 incidents where you experienced like blatant, like brazen racism during that time. Can you speak to that?
So that wasn't actually during 9/11 or in those early years. That was recently. That is, I mean, let me come to that, and I'll start with. Let me come to that sort of through my personal journey, you know, and I'll start it at 9/11, though that is just the worst place to start one's spiritual journey. It starts earlier, but let's just start it at 9/11. So yes, I was 16. You know, I think I was a teenager with teenagers, you know, at the best of times have a lot of attitude. I had extra attitude. And so, you know, I already felt like I wanted to sort of perform my rebelliousness. You know, I was just one of those kids. And I was already starting to, I think, struggle a lot with my Muslim identity. I was a pretty good Muslim kid up until I was a teenager, when, I don't know, one by one, I just kind of started making the decisions that I don't need to adhere to this. I don't need to adhere to that. I got my whole life to make up for, you know, that. And ultimately it was just because I was feeling left out, you know. And when 9/11 happened, I think that was sort of, it was a little bit of a linchpin in a sense that it gave me, I think, an extra incentive to disassociate myself from, from my Muslim identity. It didn't happen right away, but it certainly accelerated after that. Now, what was that all about? I think it was, you know, a desire to not have to answer people's questions, not have to be a spokesperson for the faith. You know, it was a way to sort of like absolve myself of what was actually, you know, it was a rather confusing time, because it's not like I grew up in a town with a large Muslim community and many Muslim role models and an imam that I could go to. And, you know, we didn't have a mosque. There were no, I couldn't depend on a Friday sermon to try to help me contextualize, you know, peaceful Islam from radical violent Islam. I didn't have that. And I don't, so without that, I think it was just easier to kind of check out a little bit, and maybe more than check out, just to sort of become so hostile to Islam and religion in general that no one would ever think to associate me with, you know, those Muslims, the baddies.
Right.
And so, but it wasn't really a response to anything too tangible or concrete. It wasn't like it was thrown in my face all the time. It's not, despite growing up in a small rural community in northern Alberta, which people will automatically assume from their own prejudices that it's going to be a rather prejudiced place. It wasn't really. I mean, it wasn't to me. We were a pretty privileged family. And so that probably had a lot to do with it. Lebanese people in Alberta have a lot of sort of social capital as well. That probably had a lot to do with it. It was really just all in my head, all internalized, all just sort of, you know, the media that I was consuming, sort of going inside of me and then coming out with a particular image. I, you know, for a while kind of dabbled in that militant new atheist movement and kind of realized that the veiled bigotry of that and mellowed out a little bit. By the time, you know, around 2015, let's say, I was mostly just kind of ambivalent about religions. And that's when I started to experience Islamophobia.
Right.
It was almost 15 years after 9/11, and it was in Edmonton, you know, one of the largest and most multicultural cities in Canada. And, you know, what does this correspond with? Well, Trumpism and the sort of toxification of social media and the rise of ISIS and ISIS-inspired attacks and the, you know, the twilight of the Harper administration too, going sort of full bigot in that last campaign. And all of that gave social license to people who'd harbored these anti-Muslim sentiments. And, you know, I'm a straight, you know, lighter skinned dude with, you know, second generation Canadian who walks about the world like he's part of the mainstream. And yet I was experiencing these random acts of racism. So I can't imagine what it was like for immigrant people, for Muslim women who wear headscarves, for you know, South Asian Muslims during that time.
Right. And the fact that you're willing to take us on the journey to share all those stories, I think is really powerful. And, you know, you started talking about your own experience back at September 11th, but towards the end of the book, you know, you share with us a very intimate moment in your life, an utterance of a prayer in 𝗎𝗎 Circle. Would you mind sharing with us your prayer and tell us if you've seen that prayer come to life?
I think, so 𝗎𝗎 Circle is this very new movement. I think it's fair to call it a movement because it is starting to expand and grow beyond Toronto into other cities. And it's a radically inclusive, queer and feminist-led mosque. And their traditions blend together many different, you know, Muslim traditions, but also what I think is essentially sort of like an indigenous sharing circle tradition. And this was all very foreign to me. I mean, it was unlike anything I'd seen before. I wasn't uncomfortable, but I would say that I was probably more familiar with like the practices in probably a church more than like, that's how dramatically different it was, at least at the start. So everyone sits in a circle and they offer what they call their Fatiha, and Fatiha is the opening line of the Quran. So I mean, I was kind of put on the spot, and I obviously, you know, you don't have to, but I wanted to participate and show my respect for these traditions. So I guess my Fatiha, my prayer was that, you know, that more Muslim families will be, you know, accepting of their family members' beliefs, no matter how much they might vary from their own Muslim beliefs, and that they, you know, my prayer was that they respect their, I guess, individual interpretations of what it means to be a Muslim.
And I just love that you offer us that, right? That you share with us that beautiful moment of thinking about that prayer. That's really beautiful. You mentioned something around thinking through Indigenous knowledges and ways of being, and I want to make sure that we talk about the fact that, you know, you're not scared in this book to tackle complex and complicated issues. In one part, you talk about anti-Black racism and Islamophobia is deeper rooted than Western Islamophobia, but that the two are not unrelated and sometimes intersect. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, you just cut out a little bit there, but I think that you were asking me to sort of speak about the relationship between anti-Blackness and Islamic. Yes, so like, look, Islam is in principle a post-racial culture, right? I mean, it is one of the reasons why it proliferated. It's one of the reasons that it still speaks to modern times and why it is, the fastest growing religion. I think because in a post-colonial world, that post-racial, that egalitarian philosophy at the heart of Islam really resonates with people. Now, is it that in practice? I don't think so. I mean, Islam likes to, or not Islam likes to, but rather, I think Muslims often like to project that image as a reality, but oftentimes it is a fantasy. The spread of the Islamic Empire actually, it actually also proliferated the African, slave market. And it's debatable whether the transatlantic slave routes and that whole industrial complex would have existed without the Muslim empires before it, sort of laying a foundation and kind of basically creating the foundations of that system, and almost systemically making the face, the prototypical face of an enslaved person Black. And that still has sway today. Slavery may be abolished, but the fact that in Arabic, the Arabic version of Negro, Abid translates to slave, shows you just like how deep rooted the idea of a Black person and a slave is in Arabic and also Islamic societies. I didn't know this for a very long time. I was probably an adult when I learned better than that, because that was my word for Black people. I did not know that it was a slur, and it exists still today. And so in this book, I go into the history of that, but what was most interesting to me is actually what that looks like today and the struggles that it looks like today. In Brazil, there is there is a movement, I think, to try to. There's a movement very similar to the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, and it might even be even more potent in Brazil, which has, I think, the largest Black population outside of Africa. But in Muslim communities, the mosques are still often drawn on ethnic lines. And so in Salvador, which is sort of the Black Mecca, maybe of the Americas, I visited a mosque that was led by a Nigerian immigrant imam who had what I found to be kind of an inspiring look at all of it. He had the opportunity to sort of, he had an opportunity to kind of partner with the Nation of Islam and make his mosque a Black mosque. And he rejected that, because he really believes in sort of the post-racial principles of Islam. And even though he knows that it doesn't always translate into reality, he thinks that it's something, worth aspiring to.
Right. And again, you sharing all these stories, you really feel like you're getting an insight, not just into the culture, the geography, and the history, it's all those things together. So I'm really grateful to you for that. I was very moved by your dedication to the book. right? You dedicated to the Quebec City victims, the mosque, the killing. And I know that you'd like to do a reading from your chapter related to that tragedy. Would you be willing to share that with us right now?
I would be happy to. Thank you for the opportunity to read from it. So this chapter is called Say Your Names. It is, like all the chapters, it is a profile of a single mosque and its community, and sort of in concentric circles moves from there to give you the historical and cultural context of the people and why they mattered. I'm going to read to you from a section. It's an interview with Ayman 𝗖𝗿, who's one of the survivors of the shooting. And he's paralyzed from the chest down. And when I met him, he just moved out of the hospital. It'd been 18 months and he just moved into his home, and his family needed a new home for his physical disability. And so this is a section from our interview. We can start Ayman 𝗖𝗿's story in January 2001, on the day he arrived at Laval from Tunisia, or go back a little further to that coffee shop on the Mediterranean coast where 𝗖𝗿's friend urged him to pursue his MBA in Canada instead of France as planned. We could begin with his childhood amid a destabilizing nation, or his birthday amid a hopeful economic boom. Or we can begin in 1881 with the French invasion of Tunisia, a tiny wedge of the Maghreb, the place of sunsets, that introduced the common language of another colonized land that would siphon the brightest minds of the Maghreb a century later. But I'll dare to go back another 4 centuries, to 1492, the year the Spanish court upended the Maghreb with Moorish refugees and the Americas with discovery. It may seem tangential, but the conquest of Granada, the last holdout of a Muslim-ruled Europe, set in motion the white Christian supremacist theology that centuries later resulted in a mass shooting that paralyzed 𝗖𝗿 from the chest down. The deep-rooted racism was exactly what 𝗖𝗿 hoped to avoid when he applied to Laval University against his father's wishes for him to study closer to home. 𝗖𝗿 didn't know much about Canadian society, but he knew what to expect as a North African in France, shunned, stigmatized, and vilified for living segregated lives. Have you changed your opinion of Canada as a tolerant society? I asked. 𝗖𝗿 delicately lifted a water bottle from his wheelchair tray with his thumb through an attached rubber band, sucked on the nozzle, and slowly set it back in his cup holder. Looking at me through glasses midway down his nose, he explained, "This attack could happen anywhere in the world. It could happen in France. It could happen in Tunisia. There's no safe place in the world." The difference, 𝗖𝗿 said, was that only in Canada would there be so much national solidarity against racism. Since the attack, the now unemployed IT specialist rediscovered his purpose in anti-hate advocacy. He's a frequent guest speaker in college classrooms to discuss the nature of hate crimes and sometimes debates the differences between free speech and hate speech. But the most satisfying work is at high school conferences or wherever he finds a Muslim audience that he can encourage to take up civic participation. If we want to protect our children from hate crimes, he said softly, we have to be engaged in society. You have to forget about the idea of Muslim services. We have to be a more active community. 𝗖𝗿 then requested we pause a few minutes so he could get his duhur prayer in before the afternoon window closed on it. He did not excuse himself from the room or unravel a prayer rug. He stayed within 3 feet of me and adjusted his motorized wheelchair 10 degrees to his right with his toggle. Paralyzed from the chest down, 𝗖𝗿 used the strength of his shoulders to lift his hands as close to his ears as he could get them, beckoned God with Allahu Akbar, and let them drop onto his stomach. I watched him improvise the prescribed motions of prayer. Stand, bow, stand, prostrate, sit, prostrate, stand again. He may have felt these motions in his muscles as he hunched his neck instead of bending forward, and the faintest pressure on his fingers as he spread his hands a few inches apart in place of pressing them onto a rug. He raised his right index finger slowly, declaring his oneness with God and the oneness of God, exactly as he had tens of thousands of times in his 42 years. Watching a man worship like this, upright and face forward, felt too sacred and intimate. Part of me was unnerved by literally coming face to face with the religion I'd abandoned. Another part felt like I'd intruded on his private conversation with God. Most of all, I didn't believe I'd earned the privilege of seeing a grown man's naked vulnerability, his ego laid bare before me. But I'd misread the moment as a feeble struggle instead of an act of defiance. 𝗍𝗶𝗍 suffered such brain damage in the shooting that doctors induced a coma, during which they gave his wife the option of removing him from life support. She refused and stuck by his side daily until visiting hours ended at midnight. When he awoke 2 months later, witnesses filled in the details of that horrible night. Once he could speak again, one of his first requests was to attend worship at the Grand Mosque. In order to pass through this tragedy, I have to face it another time, he said. He would have to wait another 7 months. He arrived at the mosque with the help of his friends who assisted him through the doors. Gliding through the prayer hall, he was overwhelmed by his brother's greetings. He noticed the new emergency exit doors and other changes. To mitigate post-traumatic triggers, trauma scene specialists suggested they repaint the interior walls a new color and replace the decor. They'd also recommended changing the pink and green carpet too, but the board had just gone through the trouble of installing them. They instead opted to cut out the damaged sections, patch up the bullet holes, and rigorously shampoo the blood spots. Some stains were too stubborn, including the faintest blotches reminding 𝗍𝗶𝗍 of the exact place he nearly died. His eyes filled with tears as he remembered the first pops of gunfire and the screams that followed. I'll leave it there.
You know, Omar, thank you for reading that couple testament to your work and what you've done here so beautifully. I mean, you know, one might say actually that so much of this book is really, it's part manifesto and part memoir. And you can see that really come this deep intimacy and honesty, particularly towards the end of the book, where you a framework for radical forgiveness that was required of you. And I really love that about this book. But I want to ask you maybe a question that
I'm surprised that you would say that it's part manifesto. I feel like I'm just never too certain about my own opinions to write anything that comes close to a manifesto.
You know, I'm a social justice professor, so I think we need to reclaim the idea of a manifesto, right? How do we define it? What does it look like in the world? And for me, it's really about speaking truth to power, right? I mean, we can talk about what that means in different contexts, but for me, I really mean that as a really kind of generous compliment because of what it is that you offer so many of us who identify as Muslims and what that means for us in reading your work.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I try as much as possible to always see things or tell the story through another set of eyes.
Right.
And you know, I wish that were I wish that were sort of the you know, the essence of manifestos. But yeah, I mean, I know that a lot of people expect, you know, when they pick up a book like this, they want to leave it with having just like, they want to take. You know, they want like a really strong take, but really the only take I have to offer is that Islam and Muslim identity doesn't look like one thing. It looks like a lot of things. And it is, you know, there are pros and cons to it all. And, you know, in the end, it is really just about the intentions of the person who is practicing it.
Right. And I think I really want to make sure that I tell you that it's the generosity of spirit that you show all the people that you spoke to that really becomes very clear in this particular project that you've embarked upon. So I really appreciate that. I've been wanting to ask you this for a while, and I hope you'll be okay with me exploring this terrain with you. But, you know, there's been a lot of books about writers finding religion, right? And along with that comes this kind of inevitable question about that quest. And, you know, you've said in passing that maybe you might be a bit spiritually overexposed. And I wanted to ask you about the hunger for that kind of story. And I guess I'm thinking about that in relation to race. There's a kind of liberty that's offered to white women in particular who embark upon this search, like to wit, like, I don't know, Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love, for example, Dani Shapiro's Devotion, maybe to a lesser extent. Can we talk about that? What are the differences in the liberties offered to white women who write on their search for faith versus men of color? You know, what that means for you?
Well, look, first thing I got to say is I don't really read those books. I love to read about, you know, religions, obviously, but I'm quite fascinated more in, I guess, in theology, and maybe more importantly, how people put those, you know, put theology into practice. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is I think there's a bigger appetite and interest in the sort of spiritual journeys of in particular white women authors. That probably has a lot. I mean, that probably has a lot more to do with the readers themselves being, I think, largely white women who made themselves be kind of seekers, but seekers in sort of like a vague, you know, a sort of more of a new age or vague sense of spirituality. And I probably fit in there with them as well. I mean, my framework is Islam, but it is also, I mean, it's also very loose. It's also a very loose interpretation of, you know, of what Islamic values are, or Islamic ethics are. So, you know, I don't know if it is necessarily a privilege that is not given to racialized people, or not often given to racialized people, or especially racialized men, because obviously it was offered to me. You know, it was, you know, I was encouraged to explore this change that was happening within me as I was writing it.
Right.
That wasn't always part of the plan. It did sort of take on a bit of a life of its own once I got very deep into the book. And, you know, as I wrote with in the chapter with about Ayman, sort of coming face to face with a religion that I'd had abandoned. You know, I'm a journalist. And there is kind of two ways to think of it. There's the journalist who should sort of maintain objectivity, but that's kind of an impossibility. And so we typically end up feigning objectivity. Or there's the journalist who just puts their cards on the table. And I thought that was probably the best way to do this. And so, you know, it was a matter of putting my cards on the table with my sources. You know, usually letting them know sort of where I'm coming from. And also it was maybe most importantly a matter of putting my cards on the table and sort of exposing myself with the readers as a matter of transparency, to also let them know where I'm coming from, and maybe also where I am possibly going as well.
Right.
And I think, you know, I don't mind being a bit of a vessel for the reader as well. You know, this book deals with a lot of sort of philosophical ideas. Right. And, you know, it is important, I think, for them to understand that philosophy can have an effect on a person. And if it is, in fact, having a sincere effect on me, then maybe that is a welcome example to share with the reader.
Right. I just think the way that you managed to find a balance between this deeply historical work and really situating it in particular geographies, along with telling us a little bit about who you are as a person, that's a very hard balance to strike. And I really admired that in this work. And I hope other readers will find that too. There's so much I want to ask you, but I only have time for one more question. And then I'm going to open it up to the audience to get them to, I know they have a ton of questions for you too.
As well.
Oh, thanks, Omar. That's generous of you. Your son was born during the pandemic, and you named it Ilyas after your parents' hometown in Lebanon. And you say that the journey of writing this book has allowed you to consider what kind of future you can imagine for him. Can you tell us how your journey allowed you to ponder that future, like a more connected one? I mean, is this book a kind of love letter to your two children?
Yeah, I think it is a love letter. Honestly, I think it's more of a love letter to my parents, to my family, to my immediate family. It is in fact a letter to my children, and in a way I sort of want them to know. I guess I want them to know sort of where I have come from, and so that when they are old enough to understand their father's complex views on faith, on life itself, maybe they'll have a bit of a textbook to get inside my head. And wouldn't we all be so lucky to get into the mind of our parents? But I think most importantly, it is sort of a textbook, I think, for in the most personal sense, for my family members to maybe finally have a bit of a window into, because I'm the black sheep. I've always been a little bit different, or done things a little bit differently. I've not always gotten approval for the way that I live my life or my views. And so I think what I wanted, I guess, is to sort of invite them in on this journey of mine, and show them that how the Islamic values that they have passed down to me are still there, and that those ethics are still there, and that I am a better person because of it. So I think that's the love letter. And just a caveat, or rather a footnote to my son's name, Elias. My parents came from a small community in Lebanon called 𝗍𝗶, which means Saint Elias, which is actually a Christian prophet. And so for me, for me naming him that, or my wife and I naming him that, it's a tribute to our roots, to my family's roots. But I think it is also a tribute to the I guess the interfaith and peaceful religion living of Christian and Muslim people. That there would be a town in a majority Muslim country named after a Christian prophet, that I would give my son this Arabic name that is also a Christian name, and he will grow up in a partially in a Muslim community. I just hope that it will I hope it'll sort of change his affect his sort of view, I guess, of the world and how faiths intertwine.
Well, I'm sure that it will do that. I have no doubt about it. And, I love that you say that it's also like a tribute to your parents, but also I would add maybe also to your ancestors too. I mean, they must just be so proud. And I just feel so lucky that I've had a chance to read this really beautiful book. So thank you so much for that, Omar.
Oh, thank you. You've been a wonderful host and such a thoughtful reader. It is, it's a genuine privilege to speak with someone who's read your work so closely as you have. So thank you for being such a generous reader.
Well, you're welcome. I'm going to open it up to questions now. So when people have questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A. And there's a lot of people who obviously would like to ask some questions. So I'm just going to open it up to different people and see if they would like to offer up their questions. I'm going to read one of the questions that we have for you, Omar, just to open it up to the floor. This is a question, and it's related to your last comment about your son. It says, don't Muslims also regard Elias as a prophet?
I don't know. Do they regard him as a prophet? Tell me. Do they? I think there's debate on whether he is a saint or a prophet. My understanding, at least from my own family, is that they interpret him as a saint, or sort of as a Christian saint, but not as a prophet. But I could be wrong about that. I could be wrong.
The person who's asked the question saying, so far I know, as far as I know, yes. And I think the same thing. So yeah, I think that's also the case as well. So I appreciate the question. Suzanne would like to ask you a question.
I do know that my grandmother used to light a candle for him on Fridays, which I always thought was very interesting. which is a very Christian tradition except on a Friday for a Muslim, a very Catholic thing to do for a Muslim woman, but she did it on a Friday. So anyway.
I love that. I love that you just shared that with us. It's so beautiful. We have a question from Suzanne, and the question is, have your parents read the book?
Yeah, I think they're in the process of reading it. And so far, good reviews. I think I knew it was going to be a difficult read. I'm sure it is oftentimes a difficult read, but I guess what I asked of them is that they read to the end before we talk about it, because there's a lot to talk about. And I just, so far they've honored that request of mine, though they don't have to. So, and in the end, that I think that certainly my mother has expressed this, that she appreciates the honesty, right? And I think and she appreciates that honesty, or that value of honesty, which she's the most honest person I know, and I hope she understands that is something that that she herself largely nurtured.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that you had a chance to share that with them, and that you really asked them to take a look at it and read it carefully before you had the conversation. I think that's really key.
Yeah, if I don't hear back from them, then I'll maybe look for their 1-star review on Goodreads, and we just won't talk about it.
Right. I wanted to ask you too a little bit. I think this is something that other people are curious about as well. Have you shared the book with other people that you spoke to in your actual project? I'm sure you've received a lot of feedback from the number of people who shared such intimate thoughts and feelings with you.
Yeah, I interviewed more than 100. I probably interviewed 200 people, and I think there's probably about 100 characters in this book. I've heard from some positively, some negatively. The people, the community that, to my surprise, has taken the most umbrage with it is the Ismaili community, which is a pretty important and well-regarded and influential Muslim community in Canada. And they are, sort of by miles the most, liberal and progressive. But in this chapter about them, I guess I wanted to examine closely that the sort of modernist philosophy, and I was having a lot of trouble getting access to members of this community, to the leaders within this community. And I just kind of wanted, I wasn't having this trouble with other mosques. And it surprised me that the Ismaili community, which puts pluralism and openness and integration and multiculturalism at the center of their way of life, would put up so many barriers. And so I had to do what in journalism we call a write around, which upset some people. And I think it upset people as well because I was critical of the leader, the Aga Khan. Maybe critical in a way that I think a lot of them are not used to. They're maybe used to people being critical of him for maybe political reasons, relationship with the Trudeaus, real estate, whatever. But I was critical of and analytical of the theology and the culture itself that is sort of passed down from Aga Khan. So that has upset some members, and that kind of surprised me because I thought it was really fair. I thought that it was largely a generous view of Ismailis and their influence and impact in this country and the Western world in general. But it is sometimes an insular and rather protective community. And I think that they're not used to that kind of criticism. They're not used to that kind of analysis even, not from outsiders, which I am. And so that's, upset.
Right.
I think quite a few members.
Yeah, and you're very upfront and honest about that in the book, right? Speaking about Aga Khan and those traditions. So again, a testimony to you too, the fact that you are that honest about your experiences. I have a question around one thing I've been wanting to ask you. Right in academia right now, we're really looking at questions of what animates our work, what are the histories and the trajectories that allow for us to produce different forms of scholarship. And one of the things I've been thinking about recently is 𝗍𝗪 Cole's new book. You've probably seen it's called The Black Papers. Anyway, it's a beautiful new book, but he talks about Edward Said as offering navigational guidance. And I was wondering who offered you navigational guidance for this project, if anybody at all? Have there been other projects or books or other people who embarked upon projects? Yeah, who offers you that when you're thinking about putting together this remarkable and innovative book?
My mom, man, no, really. I mean, my mom is not, she's the furthest thing from a scholar or a hafiza. She is the laywoman of Islam, but she cares, she cares, and she's a curious person. And whenever there was a family history or connection that I wanted to explore within this book, I could text her and she was on it. So, my mom was like a huge help in this book. I think she's probably the first person that I thank in it, in the acknowledgements. Another person would be Merrick Tyler, who's a friend of mine. He's a Cree Indigenous artist, and I mean, I don't think he's an elder per se, but he's a very wise person, highly respected. And he was sort of a sensitivity reader for me throughout this, and someone that I could go to, just get a bit of an Indigenous perspective on a book about Muslims and their influence in the Americas. I wanted to be respectful of that history. And I didn't want to treat multiculturalism with this over celebratory tone, because, whether we like it or not, and whether we had if we are immigrants, if we are not Indigenous people, then we are, or our ancestors are, agents in genocide. And, that needs to be taken very seriously, even when you're talking about racialized, vulnerable communities, marginalized communities like Muslim communities. So he was a bit of a navigational guide as well.
Somebody's put up in, I don't know if you can hear me. Somebody has put up in the chat window that somebody said that now we know where curiosity and tenacity to dig for story. And I think that's very true.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, right?
I'm
looking at the clock, and I am out of time with you, unfortunately, Omar. And I know I've got to throw it back to Jorge
done this another
to
hour.
give some final words. I know, and we're going to have to at some other time. But Omar, I want to thank you for this.
We'll start a podcast.
Book. Don't start with me, because I am right there with you. I'm right there with you.
Does the world need another podcast? I don't know.
Yes, yes, it does.
Thank you, Minelle. It's been so wonderful speaking with you and meeting you. I wish we could do this in person. Inshallah, next time.
Inshallah, yes.
Jorge,
over to you.
I vote for this podcast idea, so please do it, Omar. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Minelle, for this close, beautiful, generous reading of the book, and for guiding us through Omar's work, and Omar for sharing so generously as well. So thank you for being here tonight, both of you. Everyone, here's the book again. You can see it on Omar's screen, but go get it. It's amazing. We have copies at the library as well. And thank you for spending an evening with us. If you want to watch the event again, or you want to share it with your friends because they weren't able to attend live, this event is being live streamed to the library's Facebook page, so it's going to live there in the future, so you can go find it there. We're going to share the link to that videos page right now. Also, because we're a public institution, we would love it if you gave us feedback about this event. Your feedback helps us get better at our programming, and so don't worry about your responses to our survey going into some random dark hole of the internet. We read everything you send us. So Candy's going to share a link. It'll take you a minute to give us feedback and tell us how you enjoyed yourself or didn't tonight. Now, before I end, I want to tell you briefly about two things coming up that are really cool. One of them is on Friday, October 29th. We're going to be hosting a lunchtime conversation about modest fashion design for Muslim women. And so we're going to bring in two fashion designers who are going to showcase some of their designs and chat about issues of cultural representation. So that's going to be on this Friday at noon. And then next week on Wednesday, we're celebrating Diwali with an event about Bollywood and Bhangra. And so we're going to do an event about different dance style traditions, and we're going to see demonstrations of dance and how to learn these dances, but also a conversation around Diwali traditions. So please join us for that as well. We're putting links there. And that's it for tonight. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our lovely presenters. We're going to keep the event open just for a few minutes, just in case the audience wants to click on some of the links. But that's it from me, and we're going to get off the stage at any moment. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jorge. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. Bye.